Well, good morning, everyone. We're so glad you're here today. If you're new to us, our senior pastor is back in town. Sam, we're glad to have you back after a 14-day hiatus, or a little longer than that, actually, to Israel. It wasn't. It's totally no. He walked everywhere and is probably super tired. So I am giving Sam a free pass to fall asleep if he gets tired. But the rest of you, if you start nodding, nudge your neighbor because they need to hear this. Because I don't know about you, but I have gotten a lot of challenge and encouragement of trying to find healthy rhythms and patterns in my life as we've talked about some of these things in the Pendulum series. It's been challenging, but it's been kind of nice to realize that yes, sometimes there's two sides, but both need to be in our life, and there needs to be a healthy balance there. And there needs to be some predictable patterns, some rhythms in our life that can be sustainable. And if we do one extreme, the other one lacks, and we lack because of it. And the same is going to hold true today. But I know just as God has been working this out, as we've been getting ready to wrap up this Pendulum series, I've just been seeing how God has been setting me up for him to speak today, and hopefully you'll hear it and see how I'm trying to connect the dots that he's connected for me. But I mean, we've been talking about a lot of really cool things, and if you haven't been every Sunday for like the last 5 or 6 weeks, you can check out on YouTube or on our website. Most of them. We'll have the rest of them up here soon. But we've been talking about like things like grace and truth, faith and works, sacred and secular, lead and follow, rest and work, and covenant and kingdom. And last week, that lady was really good looking that preached, so you'll definitely want to watch that one. I'm a youth pastor. I still have to talk about my good looking wife. Sorry. Deal with it, people. But it's been really neat to see that sometimes we're really good at something and the other one we lack, and we think that's okay. But if we look at what really God wants, he wants a healthy balance of those things. And just hearing Amy and Katie the last couple weeks talk about what they did, I was like, man, this is going to mix so well with what I think God's laying on my heart. So I'm going to try to do a good job of keeping it short enough that you can all listen, but also I have a lot of information. And because I have a lot of information, I'm giving you a forewarning now. I don't usually like to do this, but when I talk about scriptures, you're going to get summaries. I'm going to tell you where I'm at so you can go back later and you can look at it. But I'm going to give you an abbreviated version of what it says and what I want to pull from it. But I want you to go back later and to look at it. Don't just take Mike's word for it, because if you do that, you're being very naive, because I'm not that smart, one. But two, I could be leading you astray, and I want you to look at God's word and see what you think it says, not what Mike says it says. So I want you to spend some time this week, as Katie challenged you last week, to be getting into God's word, to look up and just see what I said and see if how I abbreviated it is correct. Because if it's not, don't listen to it. If you don't feel like that's what God's word says and you don't get that, then it's not true right now. But I'm trying to do a good job. I promise I'm not trying to lead you astray, but I want you to know that I really do want you to be in God's word. So we are going to talk about planting and eating. Now, there was a lot of different titles that I could have made for this series that I kicked around. Really, when we first talked about it, Sam and I, we were going to call it consuming and empowering. I thought about cruising and battling. But really, when I thought about those titles, I kind of thought one of them sounded negative. Because like with the cruise ship and the battleship that we talked about a couple years ago when the state came in, that we're going to be a battleship instead of a cruise ship. Like the cruise ship kind of had a negative connotation. When I think of consume, a lot of us don't like to be called consumers, even though we are consumers. And so that gets a negative context, and then empowering can sound good. But I think we all realize that we have to plant so that we can eat, and we need both. And I thought it was really fitting too, just because I know a lot of our farmers are either finishing up or still planting, which is kind of unusual for this time of year because of the rain. And so I thought it was just kind of cool that it worked together in that way. And because we started doing planting and eating, I decided to take a quick Google search and see how much of the earth does it take to produce all of our food. Quick Google search. I didn't dive into this and do hours. I'm being honest here. But from my quick Google search and checking a few different websites, about 30% of our earth is used to produce all of our agricultural and our food, our grains, our fruits, our vegetables. Out of 80% of that 30% is used for livestock, roaming livestock, for the cows, for all that stuff. The other 20% produces all of our grains, our fruits, and our vegetables, which is pretty amazing that 6% of our earth produces all of that food. And it's pretty amazing that our farmers can make the most of that land, and we're grateful for that. But we need to plant so we can eat. Now, if we look at the beginning of time in Genesis 1 and 2, this wasn't true. When things were perfect, when things were first created before the fall, all we had to do is eat. God created everything. God provided everything. We just relied on Him. He gave us everything. All we had to do is eat from Him. And if you read and go on to 3, you realize we made this gigantic mistake of eating from the tree of good and evil. And in that, what happened is this. Our relationship got skewed. Our relationship got messed up. It used to be we could walk with God and be with God and eat everything He provided. It was perfection, just the way He created it. Then we decided we wanted more, and we thought we should be on the same level, and got deceived by the evil one and thought, well, maybe we can have a little bit more. Maybe he's trying to hold us down. We got confused. And in that, because of that, came the curse. And in the curse, the greatest, biggest, awful thing that happened to us is our relationship. There became a distance. There was a gap there. But also, some other curses happened, like we had to start planting. We had to start providing for ourselves. We had to start working the soil for our needs. And so now we are in this lifestyle of planting and eating, and we have to figure out a healthy balance. And I'm not just talking today because some of you are like, well, I knew that. I get it. I'm not just talking physically. We're going to talk spiritually too, because I believe this rhythm holds true in our spiritual life, that there's a time for us to plant, but there's also times for us to eat. So, how do we do that? How do we have a healthy balance in our church? How do we do a good job of planting and eating? Because usually, the way it usually works out in past sermons, a person who's heavy on works is usually a planter. They like to do things. That's what they do. They like to do. So they're always doing and planting and doing things for other people. If you're usually heavier on the faith side, you like to eat. You like to be in the presence of the Father. You like to just rely on Him. And sometimes you don't like to do. And that's okay. But there has to be this healthy pattern. Because if not, there's cons to both. And this can lead to burnout. This can lead to not being satisfied and making up what you want. And I'll get to that here in a minute. So we need a healthy pattern, a healthy rhythm in our lives. And the best way that I can use to explain this, I think, the best tool that I can give you so you can understand this is, in our life, we need to have a 3-dimensional ministry. We need to have an up, in, and an out. And where do I get this? I get this from the Bible. We are going to look at the greats. We're going to look at the great commandments, and we're going to look at the Great Commission is where I get this from. See, we need to have an up. When Jesus was asked in Matthew 22, 36 through 40, so if you want to write that down, Matthew 22, 36 through 40, Jesus gets asked the question, what is the greatest commandment? And he simply states this. He gives them this. He tells them, the greatest commandment is this, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul. Like, love God. That's your up. You need to have that in your life. That is the greatest and most important thing. That you have this up relationship with God. But he says the second is like it and almost just as important, and it's basically, he states that you need to love others. You need to love people. You need to love other people. And that's important too. So that's the end. We need to have other people in our life. We need to be loving them. We need to be caring them. We need to be in community. We've talked about it in the last couple weeks in this Pendulum series, but God is in community with himself from the beginning in perfection, and he created it for us. Even with Adam and Eve, that was part of that thing. Adam needed a helper. He needed someone with him. He needed community, and we still need that today. But in the Great Commission, we get told to do something else. In Matthew 28, 18 through 20, if you want to turn there, you can, but basically I'm going to summarize this. It's basically go and make disciples. Teach them what you know and what I've taught you. To go and make disciples. That's the out part. See, we can't just have, if we have just two, usually what we've been taught and what Sam and I are learning to try to help us be better disciples who make disciples in this process, what's called 3DM, in that we're being taught that a lot of us do two of these well. One of them is a little bit more of a struggle. And even in your church setting, as a church in a whole, usually you're very good at two. It's very unlikely that you're good at all three. Sometimes you're just good at one, and that's okay. But you need all three, and these are important to have a good, healthy balance. Because if you are good at up and in, you're doing great. You're eating a lot because you are with your Father. You're spending time with him, and you are just eating, taking it all in. It's great, but you're becoming fat, and eventually that fat and unhealth of just eating all the time is going to weigh you down and possibly even, just like in our physical life, cause very physical harm. Like it can kill you. Like we know now that if you're overweight, it's bad for you, and it's at extreme highs today, that more extreme highs than it has ever been, because we like to eat, myself included, and that means that can be unhealthy when we do it too much. But if you're good and you have an up, like you have a relationship with your Father and you're a doer, maybe you're an out person. You like to go out and do things and help others. And that means you're always doing. And that means you might be starving yourself out and on the verge of burnout. There is a healthy rhythm to both of these, because if you're doing, you forget that God is doing it through you sometimes. And like Katie talked about last week in covenant and kingdom, throughout the Bible, there's this covenant part where God's really speaking to who you are, your identity, but he's also speaking to this kingdom part, that he's the king and he's given you power and authority. So you might live over here doing the power and authority thing, but if he's not speaking into who you are, you're going to get lost of why you're doing what you're doing. But if you're just eating, you're just taking it all in, and no one else knows about it. And that's not God's heart either. He wants you to grow deep, but he also wants you to produce fruit, as we're going to get into here in a minute. It's very important that we have all three of these. And statistics, I don't know if any of you have heard of the Pathos, the Pareto, I don't know if I'm saying it right, the 80-20 rule. But there's an 80-20 rule out there that 20% of people produce 80%, do 80% of the work and give 80% of the tithes and offering in the church. And there's been a lot of articles on this. It was not just due to the church, but it was written a long time ago where 20% of the crops produces 80% of the food. But it really does hold true. And that would tell us, that the statistics would tell us that we are definitely out of balance as a church. If that holds true, if 20% of the people are doing 80% of the work and giving 80% of the money, there is an unhealthy balance there in people's lives. And another way that we can tell, especially here in the churches in the States, that there's probably an unhealthy balance is because we see a decline in the church in the whole in the United States. We are a dying church right now. Maybe not Church in the Palms, or not Church in the Palms, that was West Palm. That might still be, I don't know. Big Lake Church of God in the last couple of years, God has really blessed. And we are growing. But we're not the norm. And honestly, when I look at the volunteers of the church, which I did this last week, and when Sam and I have talked, because I don't have access to the giving records, but Sam does, like he should. We've talked about it. We have this rule going on in our church. We might be a little bit better than 20%, but we're real close to the 80-20 rule. And what that's going to lead out to is this. Even though God is blessing with growth, the 20% that is working and doing and planting, they're going to burn out eventually, and we're going to starve out. And the people who are eating won't be able to have enough food and enough programs to meet what they want, and they're going to go somewhere else, and eventually we'll hit that trend of the national statistics of a dying church. So I want to talk about it now while things are going good, because God is blessing, God is doing some amazing things. So I want to challenge us to look to see where we're at. And for us to find these healthy rhythms so that way we can continue to produce fruit for years to come. That God can work for years to come, that we don't burn out or just go through a phase and are a flash in the pan, but we are an actual sustaining fire that is going to do God's kingdom work for a long, long time. We've been around 100 plus years now. I'd like to be a valuable ministry in this community and more communities in 100 years from now. But what that means is we have to figure out these patterns. Just like Amy talked about 2 weeks ago, we need to be working from our rest, not resting from our work. And we have to figure out these patterns. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. We get burnt out, we get tired, and we just give up. So, before I start into this too hard and getting into the challenge and maybe speaking a little bit about if you are a heavy eater or a heavy planner, kind of pointing out maybe some things in you that you do, I want you to know this. I'm not asking you to give more. I'm not asking you to do more. I'm not asking you to give up if you're working way too hard. I'm asking you to find a healthy pattern. The church right now is good. We don't need more money. We could use more money to do more things. That's great. We could use more volunteers. But God is faithful to provide when we have these healthy patterns and rhythms. I don't need you to do more. I'm not asking this because there's this giant need and we're dying. It's not that. What I'm telling you is you need this. Because if you aren't living in these patterns, if you don't have a healthy rhythm, you are burning out or you're getting fat and lazy, one of the two. And neither one is good for you. God doesn't want that for you. He wants more. He wants to be able to speak into who you are, but then he wants to send you out with his power and authority to do what he's called you to do, because there are people out there that you know that need to know Christ. People that he's placed in your life for you to witness to. Not Sam or Mike, not Katie or Amy, not Susan, you. See, that go and make disciples wasn't, hey, if you're a pastor or if you feel called to ministry, that was for all of us. That great commandment to spend time with him and to have that up relationship with him wasn't just for Mike and Sam. That was for all of us. And we're all called to love others. Like, this isn't just a unique group. If you call yourself a Christ follower, that 3DM, that three-dimensionals, that up, in, and out is for all of us. We have to all live that to have a healthy lifestyle. So, let's take a look at some things that may show that you are eating a little too much, because we all lean one way or the other. If you're eating too much, can you do the next slide for me, Mark? Sorry. It's all about you and what you want and like. When you eat, and you eat a lot, you turn into usually being a picky eater. And what I mean by that is your preference really matter to you in church. And if it's not what you like, you're usually turned off. You have this, it's about me in you. And like, it's not what I like, so I don't care, and I'm not going to listen. Another thing, you expect others to feed you most of the time. Like, you expect to always be fed. Like, you want people just to pour into you all the time. You're not thinking about others much and thinking that maybe you have something to offer to somebody else because you're always hungry. You're turned off when the challenge, Sunday is your day to eat. Sunday is your day to be fed. If Sunday is your only day where you are coming and getting a spiritual little bit of a high and then walking out of these doors and thinking, good, now I can survive the rest of the week, you have to be starving. God doesn't want Sunday to be your only day with Him. He wants so much more. He wants to pour into you and speak to you every day of the week, not just Sunday. And it's not just through Sam, Amy, or Katie. He wants you to be in His Word, and He wants you to be in His taking time with Him so He can speak to you. God doesn't just speak to me and to Sam and to Katie. He speaks to you if you'll listen, and He wants to do that with you daily. Honestly, He wants to do it with you all the time. He wants to have a relationship like perfection where we just literally eat from Him because we have that perfect relationship and He'll provide the rest. But now we have to plan. So, another thing is with this, if you don't want to change for God, and when you'll go somewhere else when you're challenged to do so. So if you find yourself when somebody really challenges you and speaks to you and kind of lays it out to you and you turn them off and walk away from them, especially when you know it's probably something that God is dealing with you and you feel somewhat convicted about and you run away from it, that could be a sign that you're eating too much just like me, most of you can tell. I like potatoes, I like meat, and I like candy. When somebody challenges me to eat vegetables, I don't like it, and I want to do something else. This can be true for you in your spiritual life. If you find yourself running away from challenge, you may be eating too much. Another thing is you think someone else can do it. I don't have to, someone else can do it. Now that's eating too much. Those might be some signs. If that comes to you a lot, if those things happen, maybe a lot, you maybe are getting a little heavy around the waist and you need to go start doing a little bit more. Again, there's not guilt and shame here. We can all fall into unhealthy patterns. But I want you to be aware of some things that I just see that could be a sign. Now, let's look at some things, the next slide, of eating or planting too much. If you're planting too much, often you think you're better because of what you do and what others don't do. You start looking at yourself as a higher standard because it is, you think you do so much and no one else does anything else. You start, next slide, I want to make sure I got the right one. You think things would fall apart if you didn't do all that you do. You think things would fall apart if you didn't do what you do. Next one for me, Mark. Church or your time with God feels stressful, and you feel guilty if you don't do it. Next one. The sermon is usually for someone else or for someone else. It's speaking to someone else because they need to hear this. It's never speaking to you. It's usually not speaking to you. Next one. You think, the next slide says this, you think if you have to do it or no one else will. Do you notice between both of these that there's a lot that revolves around you? It's just different. This one, you think you're better and you think you're doing so much, you think you've done enough that you can earn God's love. This one, you just want so much, you just need so much that you think God should provide it and do it for you. But the truth of it is, it all hinges on God. If we're doing what's right, the pendulum swings on God. And if we have that up relationship right and we're spending time with Him and allowing Him to speak into us, when we go and do, it's not about us, it's about what God's doing through us. And if we're spending time with God, we're going to also realize that God's going to call us to go. And then we have to be faithful to follow. He just doesn't want us to be in relationship with Him. He wants others to have this too. See, He loves us enough and loves others enough that He wants us to share His love with them. We have to plant and we have to eat. Both are super important. Now, I know for some of us, eating is easy because spending time with God, I don't know how you can't enjoy it somewhat. Like, I know it can be stressful because you have so much to do and it's not always easy to plan it in your day. Maybe that means you need to figure out a healthy pattern of rest and work. And you need to rest a little bit in your Father and stop doing something that isn't that important. Because God doesn't want you just to add Him into your schedule. He doesn't want to add more to us. Sometimes He wants us to stop something so that we can do what we should be doing. But that being said, spending time with God, if you do it, usually you get fed. It's good, it's great, it's grand, it's wonderful. This planting thing seems scary because that means we have to go, and that usually means going out of our comfort zone. And that means putting ourselves out there. And really, Jesus, when He talks about going and planting, He talks about it in Matthew 13, if you want to look at there later today or later in the week. He talks about planting, and He talks about the sower of the seeds, and He talks about 4 different kinds of seeds. The first seed lands on the path and gets eaten up by the birds right away. Doesn't do anything, just gets eaten up. The second one falls on rocky soil. It sprouts, but as soon as the sun comes up, it withers up and it dies. The third falls amongst the thorns. Again, it sprouts, starts to grow, and then gets choked out by the weeds and the thorns. And the fourth falls on good soil. And that good soil produces 100, 60, even 30 times as much as it should. Like it's good. It really grows and it really produces. See, Jesus even tells us in His Word, God tells us in His Word, when we go and plant, if we just go and make the statistics, 25% is only going to produce. 25% of all the seeds that we throw out, everything that we do when we go out and plant and when we go and do, only 25% is going to actually make into something. That kind of stinks number-wise. But here's the really cool thing, because most of us when we plant, the reason we're kind of scared about planting is we think when we plant, everything has to grow. And if we don't, we're not good at it, so I'll just go back and I'll eat. And once I'll eat some more, and then maybe I'll get good, and when I plant, it'll grow this time. But the fact of the matter is, Jesus didn't have a 100% record when it came to planting. Look at the rich young ruler who walked away. Look at Judas, one of his disciples who spent 3 years with him and ended up turning his back on him and was the one who betrayed him at the very end. Planting sometimes stinks because that means you put yourself out there to have someone tell God no. Notice I said God no, not you no. See, all we have to do is be faithful to spread the seeds. And when they reject, they're not rejecting you or how well you did at presenting it. They're rejecting God. That really stinks. It hurts. And you sometimes get wrapped up and think, I didn't do a good job of presenting it. Yesterday when I came in here to preach and practice my sermon, I prayed that God would just reveal to you that it's not about you. But I realized at the same time, I was thinking, how well can I do at presenting this message? See, we really get wrapped up in this thinking it's about me. It's really hard to not get wrapped up in thinking it's about our performance and how well we do. But if we are being faithful and if we're in tune with God, He's going to show us where the fruit is, and He's going to show us when to plant, and it might not take root, and God might know that even. He might just be desperately pursuing that person, and he needs a seed thrown their way because he's trying to break through, and he's going to keep throwing seeds until that soil turns good. So stop worrying about whether that person gets saved when you share with them, but if God's laid it on your heart to share with them, share. He's called you to do. Now, for those who like to plant, or maybe those who are thinking about, and this message has been kind of challenging, you realize you need to go and do and you need to plant. Just like the farmers, when they go and look for fields, they don't just buy everything and buy a swampland and say, yep, I'm going to plant a cornfield here. It doesn't really work out that way. They like to look for good soil. So I want to give you tools to make disciples and figure out a way to hopefully do it to the best of your ability. And not just be throwing seeds where they're always landing on the path or in the thorns. How to look for good soil. And Jesus kind of gives us an example of this when he sends out his disciples in Luke 10, 1 through 14. In our 3DM thing that we're learning about, they call these people of peace. And I'm just going to kind of summarize this a little bit. But in this, Jesus sends out the 72, and he sends them out 2 by 2. And when you read it, you'll see that. And I want you to focus in on that a little bit, because I want you to know when God's calling you to go, he wants to provide someone to go with you. And now, some of you who have a husband or a wife think that means them. And it does to a point. It could mean that. But you are now one. So you need someone else. What I mean by that is, Katie and I live life together. We are one. And when I'm discouraged, she's usually discouraged. So we need someone else to do this mission with us. And we are actively, honestly, right now praying that God will provide someone to do that with us. Like, that's our call. Like, we want to go, but we want to be faithful to have someone do that with us. And you need that too. And if you're single, obviously that makes sense. You need someone else. But that doesn't mean you need a spouse. That means you need another person that you can live life with, that can encourage you and can speak in to your life. But people of peace are this. Jesus basically sends his disciples out and tells them to go out. And he tells them that the harvest is ripe. See, there is people out there who need to know Christ. They're out there. But he says the workers are few. But he talks about how he's going to send them out, but he's sending them out like lambs to wolves. And he says, basically, go to people's houses, knock on their door, take nothing with you, but knock on your door and say, peace be with you. And if they invite you in, which that's what a person of peace will do, they'll welcome you. If they invite you in, stay with them and let your peace be with them. A person of peace will welcome you. They'll be inviting. They'll like you. Sometimes we get caught up in, that person needs to know Jesus, but he hates me, and I'm going to spend all my time on that person. I don't know that that's always the case. If God's telling you to do that, sometimes he is, and he's telling you to witness to that person. God can break through that. I get that. But he also really wants us to look for these people of peace. People who welcome us in. They'll serve you. People of peace will be someone who you don't always provide for them. Often, as humans, we like to be needed. So we think we are the perfect person, or we're a believer, so we're better than them, so we have to always fix them. A real person of peace sometimes will serve and give to you. That might mean through coming to your house and doing work with you. It might mean they make meals for you. I don't know. A person of peace will serve you, though. And you can see that in the scriptures where Jesus talks about how they will do that. And then the last thing is they'll listen to you. When you give them advice, or maybe they ask you for advice because they want to know what you think. See, we all have people hopefully in our lives, and if we don't, hopefully we start searching these people of peace out. People who we know don't know God, but we know them, and they know us, and they serve us, and sometimes they listen to us, or they ask for advice. Maybe they're someone who calls you up and asks you for prayer for their cat, like I talked to someone this morning about. I don't know. But this is what I want you to start looking for. That's that good soil. And when you find it, what you need to do is start praying for them, that specific person, and how God wants to use you. And then look for opportunities to share and to invite them in. See, we all want this community. We all want to be together, and we want to have friends, and we want to be loved. And we can do that for people that we know, these people of peace. Usually that's what they're looking for. So invite them in. One way that I kind of relate this, people of peace, to, is this. In youth, when I was in high school, the Church of God youth came out with the 360 revolution. It was pray for 3 friends 6 times a week and miss 0 opportunities to share Christ with them. I started that my sophomore year of high school. I can say I had over a handful of friends come to Christ in that time, because I put them on a list somewhere where I saw daily, and I tried to pray for them daily, and I tried to actively look for opportunities to either invite them to church or to share Christ's love with them. Now, again, I want to put a little excerpt. Getting them to church is not saving them. You can save them without them ever stepping foot in this building. You can share Christ's love with them. You can invite them into your lives and show them a glimpse of Christ's love for them by just letting them into your lives and living a life and producing fruit, love, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, those things in your life, and then pointing them to God with those fruits. And then they can start doing the same thing. Doesn't mean they even have to step foot in this building. I don't care that people come to Big Lake Church of God. I care that they come to know Christ. You shouldn't care if they come to Big Lake Church of God. You should care that they come to Christ. So, why don't we do it? Hopefully you have some tools. Maybe that'll make it a little easier for you. Here's what I think. I think we look at other people too often. We look at people like a Sam or a Mike who get up on stage and think, I could never do that. You may not be called to do it, one, but if God called you to do it, you could do it. We think we don't have enough talents. And in Matthew 25, 14 through 40, we get a parable of the servants and the talents. And some have more. One starts with 1, one starts with 2, and one starts with 5 from the master, and the one with 2 and 5 produce more. They double it. The one with 1 is scared to even do anything with his talent. He buries it because he's worried that the master will kill him if he loses it. basically. The two that produce and make something of it, well done, good and faithful servant. The one that doesn't, the one that hides his talent, the gift that he was given, you lazy and wicked servant, and gets thrown into the dungeon. God has given each one of us a gift. He's given us abilities and skills to use for his glory. He wants you to allow him to speak into you in those abilities and say, okay, now I have given you the power and authority to go. But too often we're not either spending enough time with him, or we're just scared because Satan tells us we're not good enough, we're not smart enough. What if they ask me a question I don't know? And he confuses us. He makes us think that God would want us to fail. If God's calling you to go and share with someone, he wants that person to know him more than you do. He wants you to be successful. He wants you to produce fruit. It's not always going to happen, but he has a plan, and he's trying to break through with that person. So keep being faithful to listen and to go where he's calling you to go. My prayer is that you don't feel guilty at the end of this sermon because maybe you eat too much or maybe you plant too much and you're on the verge of burnout. My prayer is that you would start to look and realize what you need to do. Do you need to spend time with the Father, or do you need to go and do what he's calling you to do? Because if we do this, if we can find these healthy patterns that we've talked about the last few weeks, we will grow deeper, we will grow stronger, but we will also produce more fruit. And the kingdom and God will receive glory for it. And that's Sam and I's heart, that people would come to know God because we are starting to be people who listen to God, hear what he says, and then go and do what he's asking us to do. So I'm going to ask the band to come forward, and as they come forward, I'd ask you this simple question. What did God say to you today? And what are you going to do about it? I believe God's speaking to each one of us, and he's challenging us to find these patterns and rhythms, even though sometimes they don't make worldly sense to us, because he wants us to be in tune with him. And if he's speaking to you today and asking you to go forward and make a proclamation of that, I encourage you to go. If you want, the altars in the front here are open for you to pray at. If you want to grab someone and have